Hello, welcome to CrossCurrents, produced by the City of Fort Collins in cooperation with the Larimer County League of Women Voters. I'm Barbara Rutstein, the moderator of today's program. Our topic is voters' rights, disenfranchisement, or voter fraud. As with so many public policy issues, the pendulum swings back and forth. Our topic today is one of those. We know that at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, some delegates wanted to restrict voting to freeholders, those white men who owned property. Because of this disagreement, the Constitution ultimately left voter qualifications to the individual states. So until the 1820s, only about half the adult white males were able to vote. That changed with the policies associated with Jacksonian democracy, allowing all white males to vote. Women finally got the vote in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. 45 years later, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 assured Black Americans of the right to vote. Then, in 1971, the 26th Amendment to the Constitution lowered the voting age to 18. For so many years, public policy worked to expand the right to vote and encouraged all citizens to vote. Recently, there have been efforts in some states to make it more difficult to register to vote. Citizens are required to have government-issued photo identification cards to register as well as vote. The Brennan Center for Justice estimates that 11% of potential voters do not have state-issued photo IDs. There are also efforts to restrict early voting, same-day registration, and mail-in ballots. In Colorado, there has been a dispute between the Secretary of State and county clerks about sending ballots to inactive voters. There is also a dispute about allowing public inspection of voted ballots. To discuss these various issues regarding voting, we have on my right Scott Doyle, Larimer County Clerk and Recorder and President of the Colorado Clerks Association. On his right is Kevin Lundberg, State Senator from District 15, and on his right, Bob Bacon, State Senator from District 14. On Bob's right is Tom Lucero, Chairperson of the Larimer County Republican Party. Welcome to you and to our studio and viewing audiences. Let's begin with the controversy about sending ballots to inactive voters. First, Scott, what are inactive voters?
Well, a voter becomes inactive through state law when they have missed voting in the previous general election. So whoever missed voting in 2010 became an inactive voter in our system.
Okay, so that if you did vote in a city election or a county election, that doesn't count.
No, it needs to be our state election, the even year election, general election.
Okay. Now, who are the people who tend not to vote in those, like the 2010?
You know, I don't know that I can really put my finger on who might not vote, but I can tell you this, that, you know, I've talked to people who just want to vote for the president, for instance, so they just want to vote every 4 years. Mm-hmm. And don't want to be, I hate to say it, bothered, but that's the case with voting in off-year elections or in gubernatorial elections.
Okay, do we have any other comments on that? Do you think that's a problem?
Well, let me point this one element out, and that is that one of the dilemmas we have, and the real issue you're talking about, is shall we, in an all-mail ballot election, send out ballots to inactive voters? There are some who choose not to vote, or for some reason didn't vote in the last election, but there are also a lot of people who were registered in the area back, in this case, in 2008 and voted and then moved. Uh-huh. The case of here in Fort Collins on the CSU campus, a lot of students were registered here in Fort Collins and voted here in 2008. Mm-hmm. Well, then if they weren't there in 2010 and notice wasn't given that they had changed their registration, which can happen if they are from another state or move, Scott can answer the more precise questions there, but there are thousands and thousands of people who aren't there anymore. And
Right.
so the question is, should they have a different status if you haven't voted in the last general? And there are many of us who believe that that's a concern, that we not be just sending out, tons of ballots to people who aren't there.
Okay. Any other comments on that one? Bob?
Well, yes, I really do believe that registration ought to be permanent. And going back to the mail-in ballots, it's my understanding that if they are, other than the additional cost of sending them all out, they're set out, and if they're undeliverable, they come back. And so they aren't just floating around for anybody to open and return. And maybe Scott can respond to that if mail-in ballots are set out, if they're undeliverable, you get them back. Am I correct in understanding that?
That's correct. They're non-forwardable mail. But there's a few steps that happen in between there, too, that we could talk about a little bit with regard to what happens when a voter fails to vote in the 2010 election.
Right.
And they become inactive. And what happens with that then, a flag goes up on that particular voter in my office, and we send them out a voter information card after the election. And they have an opportunity then to respond to us and say, yeah, I'm still here, I want to remain active, and they can stay active. That's all it
Okay.
takes. But if the card is seen as undeliverable and it's sent back to me, then that generates another correspondence to that particular voter that goes out, and it is forwardable mail, whereas the first one was not. And so we try to chase down those voters to see if they're still here, in fact, and we do hear back from people in New Jersey or Kentucky or someplace they've moved to, and they say, take us off your list, and other folks we never hear back from. And through the National Voter Registration Act, NVRA, it starts a clock when when a voter goes inactive, and they're on our list as a voter in Larimer County for upwards of 6 years, and before they're actually taken off or moved into an archive. All they have to do is show up to vote, show up in one of my offices, give us a call, let us know what they'd like to do. We'll get them the right kind of directions so that they can remain active.
Okay.
And then before this election this year, the inactive voters, in August, we send out another mailer to the inactive voters that says, you're inactive, let us know if you're going to vote, and we'll get you on our list as active and send you a ballot. And those go to the inactive voters.
Okay, so that if I hadn't voted in 2010, I would have gotten this mail and could have sent it back. Now, could I still go in between now and Tuesday and vote and say I'm here and I just have been negligent?
Yeah, Barbara, you know what? If you didn't vote in 2010 and today you decided you wanted to vote on one of the issues or you wanted a ballot to vote, period, you could show up from now through Election Day at 7 o'clock when the polls close, request a ballot, and you're going to be given a ballot to vote and activated by doing so.
Okay? Yes, Tom?
So I guess the question, and I know you told me not to take the football and run in a different direction with it, Barbara, but I'm going to do that. Maybe the question should be more of a philosophical question in the sense of, based on what Scott is saying that he is doing here in Larimer County, and I give kudos to Scott to reach out to the inactive voters to educate them, to help them to understand that they will be moved to that inactive list. The question is, what is the state's responsibility to educate those inactive voters? And should there be a general threshold, a standard that says, if you're not willing to participate in the system, to one, vote to remain active in 2010, and or secondly, to respond to the correspondence from the Larimer County Clerk and Recorder, the other clerks, for example, in the other 63 counties across the state, should we be sending you a ballot? And so I guess that takes us back maybe to the core of the question, should ballots be going to inactive voters who've demonstrated that they don't want to participate in the system?
Right. And that's a valid concern. I can understand that. I mean, it seems to me that 2 years, or there are people out there perhaps who only want to vote for president, as Scott mentioned earlier, and then they're off the list. Well, if they decide they want to vote for president again, it seems to me, I guess they can just go in and say, we're here and we want a ballot, right?
That's correct. That's good. It's that easy.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Okay, now what if someone moved from Denver here, and they register here, then is Denver notified?
We have a state voter registration system now. It's called SCORE.
Uh-huh,
And so when they move and notify us, and we make that change in SCORE, they're taken out of Denver County and placed in Larimer County.
I see.
And so if
Okay.
they want to come in and get a ballot, they just have to, through self-affirmation, say, yeah, I've lived at this address for 30 days. And they'll be given a ballot.
Okay, okay, very good. Any other questions or comments on this? Okay. Scott, what kind of identification is needed to register to vote?
Well, through the Help America Vote Act, there's 10 different identifications that are available for use by voters, anything from a driver's license, which we really like, to a utility bill.
Oh, okay.
So there's any number of pieces of identification that folks can use to come into the voting location.
So in Colorado, or is it Colorado or Larimer County, they do not need a photo ID?
No, it's in Colorado. We don't have a law for a photo ID at this
Okay,
point.
okay. Yes,
I
Kevin?
wonder if I could ask Scott a question on this.
Sure.
Because it's my understanding that the way Colorado law works, it says a photo ID or this or this or this, and it goes all the way down to even below a utility bill to a self-affirmation of this is who I am. Is there an actual requirement that they show with that self-affirmation evidence of their residence or not?
Well, if it's going to be a self-affirmation, that spawns and triggers a provisional vote. So they're given a provisional ballot, and then we ask them to, within a 10-day period, give us proof of who they are. And so
That's for registration or for getting a ballot?
that's for proving they're a registered voter and who they say they are.
But to register to vote, I believe you can just say, I am who I am, under a threat of perjury. But in fact, even a utility bill is a higher standard than is the bottom line requirement.
That's true. To register to vote, that is true. If you came in anytime during the year and want to register to
Right.
vote, it's a self-affirmation.
Right.
We trust our citizens, is what it means.
Okay, so you don't need a
Some of us
photo
do.
ID.
Well, I like to trust but verify myself, actually.
Okay, anybody have any questions on that one? Looks like it's pretty easy, and we don't have those problems in Colorado that you have to have a photo ID or a passport or one of those things. Yes, Bob?
Barbara, there have been at least 3 bills come through a committee that I serve on in the Senate that have tried to address this problem. And in all of the testimony, we have never found any verification of any fraud that did occur. And so if the self-affirmation and the registration of voters, even with those roadblocks of registration, have worked in the past, until we see that there is a real issue, rather than assuming that there is one without any proof of it, I think that we ought not to make it more difficult for citizens to be able to vote. And there are many people who do not have the neat file cabinets in our basement or whatever room we have those in, the young people, the homeless, and others. And we ought not to make it more difficult for those people to participate in the political process. And so it's
Okay.
my wish and my hope that we continue to make this as open and accessible as possible for as many people to participate in the whole electoral process.
Okay, Tom?
Well, and if we can bifurcate the issues between whether or not there actually has been voter fraud, and Scott and the 2 senators can speak more knowledgeably about this than I, but my understanding as far as the voter fraud and what Secretary of State Gessler was hoping to demonstrate with the potential 5,000 plus, Scott?
I think it was 12,000, actually.
12,000 individuals who participated in, I believe it was 2010, 2008, somewhere in that time frame. Back to Senator Lundberg's issue of self-affirmation, citizenship verification. You were supposed to be a citizen of the United States in order to be able to vote. Now, via self-affirmation, somebody can go up to a registration drive and say, I am so-and-so, yes, I'm an American citizen, and yes, I can vote, and sign up, register to vote. Through the Secretary of State's research, they have found approximately 12,000 individuals that they want to question their proof of citizenship on. Individuals who have green cards that the Secretary of State cannot verify that they have actually become citizens. Now, the Secretary of State needed the authority of the state legislature, correct me if I'm wrong, in order to complete that verification process. Now, could it be that 12,000 individuals went through and are American citizens? I don't know until we can complete that research. So the question would be to the two senators, why not give the Secretary of State the authority to do that and remove all doubt that in fact voter fraud is not taking place?
Tom, it's not my understanding that we needed legislation in order to be able to do it, that the Secretary of State needed to engage the Attorney General in order to investigate actual persons that reportedly were in that category of not being able to vote or were not yet citizens. And so the question really in the committee and with much of the testimony was, have you identified any one person that did vote that previously was not a citizen? And that's a number, as I understand it, between a given time in which the people had, X number of people had green cards and then so many others voted. And so it's a conjecture that some of those did indeed vote and were not yet citizens or could not be citizens. But it's, from my point of view, we really need to have an actual accusation and proof that there is someone. And if the Secretary has the name of a person, he needs to forward that to the Attorney General and have a case.
Okay, and so how do we know that these people have green cards, let's just say? Do they write that in their application? How do we know they have green cards?
No. And again, I'm turning to the two senators because I know just enough to be dangerous. So I was a good addition to this panel because
true
I'm.
with all of us, Tom.
But based on the voter rolls, based on being over delay, and maybe Scott knows better how these individuals are recorded in the database, that individuals cast ballots that at one point in a state system were not American citizens, and they overlaid that. And
Let me speak to this a little bit because I might be just dangerous enough too with the information I have, but from what I was told, the evidence that these people may not be U.S. citizens is that they were actually registered with a Colorado driver's license as an alien. Colorado will give driver's licenses. These are people who are here in the country legally. Believe me, it's a strict process to get a Colorado driver's license, but you do have to determine, are you a citizen or are you not? And this was taken. This was a crossover from those in that driver's license list with those who actually did in fact vote.
I see.
And what the Secretary of State was looking for was legislative authority to pursue that, to actually determine if there was any wrongdoing or not. And I'm actually quite frustrated with how the process has worked over the years, because whenever the question comes up, shall we find out if there is fraud there, the answer is, well, we haven't seen it, so we must assume it isn't there. I'm sorry, I'm not that naive as to think that everybody is going to play by the rules. Unfortunately, it doesn't occur. And the voting citizens need two things. They need access to the ballot themselves, and they need confidence in the integrity of the process. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that confidence is not very strong when things like I believe it was in the Senate that the bill was killed, to allow the Secretary of State to really do his due diligence and determine, are the voters on the registration ranks legitimate or not? Are they citizens?
But we don't know names, I guess. Is that it? Is that the?
Well,
Or he has names. I'm not sure I understand. He has names of people with driver's licenses that say they're an alien, and yet they voted.
What he had was, if I understand this again correctly, is a list of names of people who had driver's licenses who were aliens at the time that they obtained the license. And then he crossed that over with the voting, those who were registered to vote and those who actually did vote. And there's where he got several thousand matches between the two. And he did not have the authority to go further than that. We have a Secretary of State who knows the law very well, and he understood that he needed more legislative authority, more legal authority to pursue that, to go and check those things out, because it's just a point of concern. At one point they were an alien, at another point they voted. Had they all become U.S. citizens or not? And there are other examples of fraud that are out there. In the state of Minnesota, a private group set out to determine just what the accuracy of the vote was in 2008, where the U.S. Senate race was determined by, I think it was 100 and some votes. And thus far, there have been over 100 convictions of voter fraud, a couple of hundred more that may not make it through, may not be fully convicted because of the strict statute of limitation for that, and evidence of literally thousands of others that voted improperly. In the county of Larimer, right here, in 2008, I had a citizen come to me who had direct evidence that her mother, who was unfortunately an Alzheimer's patient who didn't even know her name, had been fraudulently registered to vote in the nursing home she was in, right then and there. And I actually ran legislation to try to create a better accountability for those people who are conducting these registration drives. But unfortunately, again, it was killed in the Senate State Affairs Committee. I'm disappointed when we just don't give the tools there to really determine, do we have a credible election system that has the robust integrity that the voters really need.
Okay, Bob?
Two observations. The Secretary of State is not a law, investigative, or prosecutorial official. And so it is not within the Secretary of State's job description to look for and to prosecute and to name people who have violated the law. That's the Attorney General. And so in testimony, we discovered that here we were asking for an elected official to have other kinds of duties other than running the office of Secretary of State. And the Attorney General certainly is the one, in order to investigate what he may believe, even in collaboration with the Secretary of State, may be those individuals who have driver's licenses indicating that they are aliens and then indeed vote. I think it's really dangerous to give various other officials investigative and prosecutorial prerogatives outside of those that are in the legal area. The other one, Senator Lundberg, registering to vote is not the same as voting, and I think that Scott would verify that person who was registered would, if she received a ballot, would had to have had the signature verified. And so I think that there are safeguards there between a registration and an actual voting of a ballot, and maybe Scott can speak to that.
Sure, go ahead.
In Larimer County, what we do is when we receive a transaction that happens at a motor vehicle station, a motor voter kind of thing, I have someone that checks those particular registrations and makes sure that those people have registered. If it looks like there's some kind of a data entry error, and there are, because clerks that are doing driver's licenses and working on these things sometimes check the wrong box and do those kind of things. Now, when the Secretary identified these thousands of people that were out there, wow, that really alarmed the Clerks Association. And so the first thing we did was share the information, Mr. Secretary, so we can go forward and investigate this. Not necessarily investigate, but have a look. Send some letters to these people and possibly and let us have a look if there's some data entry errors. And so that information's never been shared with us, and we handle a lot of very sensitive information in the clerk's office. And so we're not really understanding as to why that can't be shared with us and why we can't help the state look into this issue if it isn't in fact an issue. I can tell you this, that I've talked to my staff about this, and we sat down and had a little round table about it, and I've been assured that we don't have any of those in Larimer County, and it's been data entry errors when they have occurred.
Okay, now what about people in nursing homes? There is, I don't know if there are concerted efforts to make sure those people vote or register to vote, and sometimes there can be an issue about that, but I'm assuming we're not talking about thousands of votes in Larimer County, are we?
Well, I don't think we're talking about thousands of votes, but I think Senator Lundberg has touched on something there that, probably people register and that are in nursing homes or in those kinds of situations, and how they vote, we're not in every place all the time, and so
But you check signatures.
We do check signatures.
Uh-huh.
We do on every ballot that arrives.
Let me give a little
Sure.
clarity on this particular example I
Sure.
gave, because this was somebody who had been, it was her daughter who brought the issue to me. She was very concerned because she said when her mom actually went into the Alzheimer's disease, that one of the things they did is they ensured that she was not registered because they knew she wasn't capable of making a decision. And so if there was a signature card that would have been produced, it would have been produced within the last few weeks or months prior to receiving the ballot, because that's the time period where she was registered, then the ballot came. It came through, well, when the lady asked the staff, they said, oh yeah, somebody came through here and just registered everybody who didn't think they were registered to vote. It was fraud. It was direct fraud, because the law says you have to know your name, you have to know your place of residence. She knew neither. And so, again, if there was a signature card, it would have been most recent and it would have matched. I'm sure you've got some, if you've got my signature in your files, and that's a pretty sloppy one right there, I know that.
Well, somebody matched it. Senator.
What does a
good, I
county
think.
clerk do in that situation?
In the situation with the nursing homes?
Yes, with what Kevin is talking
Well,
about.
the law doesn't allow us to just take someone off of the rolls because their daughter calls and says they're incompetent. And so if
That's great.
maybe I should have rephrased that.
My children would be calling your
Yeah,
office
I
all the time, Scott.
Well, the fact of the matter is there would have to be some kind of a notary, and whoever it is that's suffering from Alzheimer's would have to make their mark and have that paperwork brought to us that way.
I see.
So the voter
But there
has
is
to-
no way of verifying in a nursing home or a home like that, or a similar situation, maybe even with younger people disabled, that in fact they know what they're doing. You just assume that they know what they're doing.
Yeah, it's not a county clerk's place to be
Right.
looking into the mental well-being of our voters. Sometimes I question it.
Well, actually, though,
Yes.
Scott, if you recall, if you look at the law, it states that to register to vote, the citizen goes to the clerk or an agent of the clerk and affirms, I think that's the word, affirms their name and their place of residence. And so in this particular situation where somebody literally is not capable of that, then there is a point of judgment there necessary to properly process the registration.
But it's probably possible that this person, or many of them, moved from knowing exactly where they were to some place where they're not so sure anymore, and they're a longtime resident.
It's possible, but this is, I can assure you this is not the case here. It's, the real point of the matter is that everyone turned a blind eye to an injustice that was done in the registration process. And I went to the county clerk's office, and they simply said, go to the district attorney, took it to the district attorney, and their answer was, well, how can we follow up on this? So I ran legislation to ensure that people who would engage in a voter registration drive would be more carefully monitored, and that too was a blind eye was turned to that as well. So, no, we don't have a good process in place for those, and that concerns me because I want to see a voting system that has integrity, that we can put our confidence in, that anyone who is a citizen of that area can register. I want that to be as smooth and as easy as possible, but there has to be limits so that people who do vote have the confidence that their vote counts as a citizen and isn't being canceled out by some, funny business that somebody else has played on the side.
Okay, do we have any questions in our audience?
And I have a question actually regarding the signatures on the ballots versus the signatures that they're comparing them to. Where exactly first do those signatures that they're doing the initial comparing with come from? And then number two, how are they doing the comparison? Is it by visual, by whoever's scanning them in? I mean, does this happen with every single vote? Or is it a computer program that's actually going through and looking for, identical loops or points of interest?
That's a quick question.
It's all for me, isn't it?
Yes, it sounds like
Thank
it.
you. That's really a good question, and I'm glad to get this out to Fort Collins. The fact of the matter is when you sign your voter registration form, that is scanned into the SCORE system. And prior to the election, we pull all the signatures on our voter list for Larimer County, and we store those. And then we have barcodes on the envelope that you return your mail ballot in. And what we do is we have bipartisan judges who sit in front of a computer screen and scan those ballots in, and it pops up the signature that we have for that particular voter. And those two judges have to agree that that signature matches of what we have in the system. If it doesn't, it goes to another set of judges who look at it, and these guys put their heads together. They take it very seriously over there. Our election judges are they're the audience, they're the people that's watching this show, and they are beyond reproach with regard to their integrity. So if that team then cannot agree on that, we fill out a letter, and it goes out to the voter, and we say, did you break your arm, or you sign your name differently, whatever the case might be, come in and verify it. And so they have to come in and verify that and show us an ID of some sort. And then that ballot's pushed through the system for that vote to be counted. If it matches, then it goes on through the process unimpaired and is counted. Does that answer your question? Every one. We don't miss any.
And how many people do you have doing this? Teams of,
We have teams of 2 looking at ballots, and we have, let me see, I suppose 8 or 10 teams in this particular election doing just that function.
oh, okay. That's pretty amazing. Very good.
And it's a lead-in to switching back to mail-in ballots because I understand that one of the biggest reasons communities and states have gone to mail-in ballots is to increase voter participation, and that the returns on mail-in ballots are much higher. You get many, many more people deciding to vote because there is a mail-in ballot. And this has been one of my concerns with the current issue in Colorado, is that if we don't mail to inactive voters, and yes, you do give them lots of opportunities to say, yes, I want to do it, but it's different if you've got a ballot in your hand and you're still here and you didn't make a phone call, you didn't go down to the clerk's office. Does anyone have any research on how inactive voters react when they actually get a ballot in their hand? I've had half a dozen phone calls in the last couple of weeks about, oh, you were a teacher, can you help me out with this? I wasn't going to vote in this election, but I got the ballot and I decided to go ahead and vote. And I think that this is an important question that needs to be addressed on the mail-in ballot issue and on the inactive voters.
Go ahead.
That's a very good question too, Mary, thank you. And as a clerk, I do have a little experience with regard to inactive voters and sending ballots out to them. As I said before, we try and chase down voters so we can find them and reactivate them and get them back into the political system, if you will. And what I've learned, and the law required us in the primary of 2010 when we went to permanent mail-in voting, and we were able to do, well, we did permanent mail-in before that time, but when we went to being able to do primary elections in the mailbox through the use of a mail ballot election, The law required us to send to inactive failed-to-vote voters for that one particular election. And so we did here in Larimer County, and what I learned from that was that out of every 100 I sent out, I got 3 back. And so the cost per vote is just almost cost prohibitive to me, and I think from my standpoint, it's a misuse of tax dollars for me to do that, when in fact in previous to that I've sent several different mailers out trying to locate that particular voter. All they have to do is let us know they're there, and we're happy to send them a ballot. And as well, I wonder if I hadn't sent those to those 100 and I got back those 3, would those 3 have activated themselves anyway and voted? So there's some real questions with regard to that. 3%, and I'm spending your tax dollars that way. That's why I didn't mail to inactives this time. I couldn't even tell you what the splits are with the political parties, R's and D's use. I don't have a clue. It was about tax dollars in our budget.
What is the tax cost of mailing to inactive ballots, the total cost?
The total cost, had I done it this election, it would have been somewhere between, I don't know, it would have been around $50,000.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so what are the benefits of a mail-in ballot?
Well, you want to go, I'll go.
Who wants to go, Bob?
Well, I think that nearly every study has shown that the voter participation goes up with mail-in ballots. That it is much more convenient and busy families in going to a polling place. Now that we have also early voting, does help that whole process. But there are many studies that show that mail-in ballots does increase the voter participation, and I think that's what all of us really want, is for citizens to participate. It's a pity that the United States, even in 2008, with the large participation, we had about only three quarters of the people participating, and it's I think shameful that we in the United States, with the right to vote, vote in such low proportions in our elections. And so I think mail-in ballots then help those people to jog them to vote, and it's convenient for them to vote. And sometimes busy families, shut-ins, and others really can use that method. And so I encourage mail-in ballot.
Okay, anyone else? Scott?
Go ahead, Scott.
Okay, I sure will. You know, another benefit from the fiscal side of things is that I held an election, the presidential election in 2008, and in Larimer County that cost us $1,200,000. That's pretty expensive. You think, what does he spend all that money on to hold an election? Well, Colorado has a very complex system, and we have a lot of options for our voters, which is good. I like the idea of having options, but options do cost money. And so for me to do the same election, we did an apples-to-apples comparison at the end of that election to see how much money we could save. We could do it at 1/3 of the cost. For $400,000, we could have conducted that whole election. So in the
That
fiscal...
would be all mail-in.
All mail-in, all mail-in for that election. And as well, going into next year's election, I'm looking at what are the dynamics? How are we going to set up our election? What's it going to look like? We're going to have mail voting. We're going to have early voting. We're going to have election day vote centers in Larimer County. And I predict, and I don't think I'm going to be too far off here, that we're going to have 80% of our voters in Larimer County vote in the mail next year's election to presidential. We'll have a dismal 15% more, well, wait a minute, 10%, something like that, in our early voting, and those will be the second week of early voting. And then maybe 8 or 10% on election day.
Oh, I'm coming on election day.
I know as well. And I would expect you and this audience to be there on election day.
We're the type.
I know.
If I might add this one
Sure.
point, and it's the point that you really made, is a citizen's responsibility and privilege to vote is a very, very important thing. And one of the troubling issues to me of pushing it all into the mailbox is to move some of that process really out of the what shall we say, the ceremony of voting, if you will. And to me, it because I'm with you, I vote on election day. I go to the voting place, and I believe that reinforces in my mind much of the significance of what I am doing. I think it should be available, and I think if somebody needs a ballot sent to them, that it should be sent to them. But this full court press to make sure that everybody votes by mail, or as many as possible, I don't understand that. I honestly don't. I think it's spinning our wheels unnecessarily. If it's all mail, then you can get rid of the other, cost drivers, Scott. But if it isn't, then I don't understand why we're, almost forcing people to go through the mailbox.
80% is not forcing anyone to do anything. That's
but-
a very large majority.
But I would insist that it does to a degree, because it's not I requested this ballot, it's I requested a ballot in the mail, and then you're pretty much in the system, are you not, until you say otherwise?
Oh, no, not at all. You can request a mail ballot just for one election. You can become a permanent mail voter, either one. I
But
mean,
you
either one.
press the permanent one. I mean, I've seen enough stuff you've sent out, and so it's an encouragement, and it's a one-way door, too, unless you take the initiative to say, stop, don't send me any more ballots. And that troubles me greatly.
Okay, Tom,
Barb.
you have some comments on that?
I do, because maybe I'm in the vast minority, because even though I don't vote on election day in the vote center, I actually go to a vote center to vote, and I take my kids because it's part of that educational process, and I have every year since my children were little. And I think, and I don't want to lose this conversation about vote fraud, because I think it ties into it. And I believe that there should be standards. There
should be what?
Standards as far
Standards.
as voting goes. And I know Senator Bacon was talking about showing ID, and I said, let's bifurcate the issue, talk about vote fraud first, and then what would be those standards that we would require of citizens in order to vote. Now, I also happen to support the idea that an individual should have to show an ID to vote. And I've got study after study that says in states that have voter ID requirements, it does not diminish turnout. In fact, turnout actually increases in the handfuls of individuals that are surveyed who choose not to vote. Their answer is yes, voter IDs are prohibitive. But in the formative studies, it's less than 5%. Would the legislature be willing to accommodate those individuals who cannot afford an ID, the ability to buy an ID, in order to be able to vote? Now, I think back to the point Scott is making about costs and the point that Senator Lundberg made a little while ago. We need to determine what that highest level of standard should be with regards to elections, because Kevin hit the nail on the head. If there is one person committing voter fraud in Larimer County, it negates my vote. And so this idea that I, as an alien, can obtain a driver's license, can go register to vote, and then can utilize that driver's license to be able to vote would constitute voter fraud. I want to know about that. I want integrity in the system, and ultimately, in my mind, back to the mail-in ballots, the only way to guarantee that integrity is to have individuals be required to show up on election day or in a window where we have the vote centers with an ID to say that they are citizens. So the guarantees that we have to put in place have to take place well before election day. Proof of citizenship, ID, knowing who those individuals are.
Okay, any other comments?
You began with a description of what happened back in 1787 and going forward. The march in the United States has been, over a long period of time, to get rid of all of the roadblocks, get rid of all of the requirements that suppressed the vote over a long period of time. The Jim Crow laws, the poll tax, and so forth down the line. And many of these measures now are coming into place that may, in fact, suppress the vote. We need to make it as easy for citizens to vote and participate as possible. And I predict that if this program is shown in 20 years, they're going to say they didn't even mention anything about online or electronic voting, and that has become the standard. I think that we're really dealing with something that's going to radically alter in the future, where it's going to be much easier for people to both register and be identified and to vote electronically, and we're not going to have to drive our cars anyplace.
Scott, have you talked about that with the county clerk, or with the clerks?
Well, we certainly have.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, with regard to fraud, there seems like there's a certain amount of question in the air here regarding the integrity of our system, and as even in Larimer County. And I want people to feel in Larimer County we have a good voting system here. We have a lot of safeguards in place, and we follow the law, every step of the law.
And you have no indication of any kind of
If
fraud?
there's fraud, you know, it is usually by someone who is elderly and has thought they got a mail ballot, or they went to a polling place and voted, and then they came down to our motor vehicle shop to renew their plates, and they forgot they voted, and they insist they haven't voted, and so they vote provisionally there because our system shows that they'd already voted. So does that mean they voted twice? Well, yes, it does, but did they really, both their ballots really count as twice? No, and so we refer those over to the district attorney, and investigator goes out and talks to those people about those kinds of things. And that's a onesie-twosie kind of thing here in Larimer County, and usually by accident. So, you know, with regard to fraud, if it's there, show it to me. I mean, you're talking about some of the stuff in the nursing homes and some of that, that's out of my control. I can't do anything with that. Let me finish. With regard to IDs, the Clerks Association has talked a lot about IDs for voters, and up to this point have not favored that kind of thing, and that's based on we want to be sure that people can vote, and to require people to have an ID that everyone might not have or readily have available to them doesn't seem reasonable to clerks, and so we've been in opposition to that particular stance at the Capitol. You know that's true. So, and the integrity of the Larimer system here it's very important to me that our voters know that we have a good system in Larimer County, and we have a lot of checks and balances in place.
Okay, and the one thing that I think is sort of we're not mentioning, and I think that we have a feeling perhaps that undocumented workers or people who are not citizens are trying to vote. And I'm wondering if that's a reasonable thought, because I think that if I were living in a foreign country and I might care a lot about their politics, especially if I were there illegally, the last thing I would do was show up at a voting booth. And I'm just wondering if we really think that the people who are here illegally would attempt to vote.
Well, multiply that out over the hundreds of thousands of people who are either not here legally or are here legally but are still not citizens. And I'm sure you're quite correct that many, many people would have your reaction and say, no, I don't want to do this. But I'm sure any reasonable person would also figure out that others would think, well, wait a minute, all it takes is for me to just walk in and say, I'm a citizen, register me to vote, and you're registered, because that's all it takes. You know, Colorado law, again, we said this earlier, but it says you're required to give a voter ID or, and it gets all the way down to, or just give a self-affirmation. I am who I say I am, register me to vote. And then you're in the system, and then you vote.
And we don't know if there are people like that there.
We have no idea, except we do know that there are tens of thousands, more probably hundreds of thousands of people in this state who are not citizens, and all it takes is a couple dozen, maybe a few hundred, and that's enough to throw some elections. In the state of Minnesota, we have a U.S. senator that after several recounts, and that's a long, tawdry story as well, but the bottom, the end of the day, it was less than 200 votes that determined the outcome, or move back to the year 2000 and look at a presidential election, the same thing. It hung on a very thin edge. We need confidence that every one of those votes counts as a legitimate vote.
Barbara?
Yes.
Can I throw out two quick facts? And the 3 studies I have the information for were conducted by universities. So I don't think anybody's going to attack the validity or the credibility, and I'll leave them with you. Scott, this idea of requiring ID in order to vote, but I do have one quote, and then I want to tie into what Kevin said. Former Democrat Congressman Arthur Davis in African America has changed his opinion just recently. And he's quoted as saying, "When I was a congressman, I took the path of least resistance. Without any evidence to back it up, I lapsed into the rhetoric of various partisans and activists who contended that requiring photo identification to vote is a suppression tactic aimed at thwarting black voter participation." And then he concludes by saying, "If you doubt it exists, I don't. I've heard the peddlers of these ballots brag about it. I've been asked to provide the funds for it, and I am confident it has changed at least a few close local election races." Now, if you Google the phrase "list of close elections," you will see over the last 110 years between Canada, this study is Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States, elections where tens of thousands of votes have been cast and the outcome is a tie. You will see in the state of Florida, 5,962,000 votes were cast for president. This is Al Gore, George Bush. Separation, 537 votes. In the Alaska House of Representatives, 10,035 votes, 1 vote was the difference. In Minnesota,
It's 312.
it was 312. Kevin Lundberg saw that. Our very own 7th Congressional District here in the state of Colorado, when Mike Feely and Bob Beaupre ran against one another, 175,000 votes, 938 votes, the vote difference, 121. So this idea of whether it's a vote or two doesn't make a difference. If you win an election by 1 vote or 2 votes, integrity in the process and knowing that the right individuals have the right to vote, I think is fundamental and it's critical. So, and I have all of the confidence in Scott Doyle in what is going on in Larimer County, but the idea that we could be sitting out there with 12,000 individuals who potentially cast votes as legal aliens of the state of Colorado, when we're talking about elections and cases that are determined by 1, 2, 5, 10, and a couple of hundred votes, when hundreds of thousands of votes are cast, we have a responsibility to guarantee the integrity of the voting system.
Okay, Bob?
I agree, Tom, that there are many close votes. But I also know that some of the measures put in place in order to say that we are going to keep those people who are not qualified to vote, like illegal aliens, are the same procedures that are going to disenfranchise many people who don't have the ability to have those kinds of documents. Many people have suggested that in our inner cities where people, particularly young African Americans, don't drive, they don't have driver's licenses. And so what we're doing in effect is with the homeless, what we're doing with the marginalized, the minorities, and many other people who do not have the kinds of storage facilities that each one of us has, we just assume that everybody has that. And here we are, and I look at the people walking around the Capitol with their grocery carts, pushing their worldly goods. They don't have a picture ID, I would wager. They don't have a birth certificate. And so what we are doing in order to solve one problem, we are creating a much greater problem, I do believe, in disenfranchising many people who may not have the advantages that you and I assume everybody has.
Okay,
I wonder if
Kevin?
I might dive in just a little bit and agree with Senator Bacon to a large degree.
Oh, thank you.
Maybe not your ultimate conclusion that we not have any controls, but the fact that many people who are valid citizens who should be voting have a difficulty coming up with documentation, I would agree is correct. And I believe that we should have, if we have a photo ID system in place, some states I know who have gone down this road have created a hardship case where if you can't afford it, that you can get it without any cost, as well as I believe we need to have a very robust appeal process. In Colorado, it's very difficult to get a driver's license. We have a very solid system there, which works for the most part. But where it doesn't work, as a matter of fact, when I was in the House and we were passing some of these laws, I was the one who went to the sponsor, Representative Marshall, and worked with her to amend the bill to put an appeal process in place so that when there were problems, that you just weren't stuck bouncing up against this, inflexible bureaucracy. We do need to accommodate that, but it's a balance, and we also need to recognize the necessity for the most credible voting system possible, so that those close votes are simply close votes, but not something that few have real confidence in.
Okay, we have spent 55 minutes at this, and I think it's time to wrap it up. And then I will ask you as your final question, what changes, if any, should be made to the Colorado voting laws to make voting more accessible or to make it more, what would you say, Kevin's, more credible, if you think it is not? Why don't we just start with Tom and go along the line?
Well, thank you very much, Barbara, and to the League of Women Voters for the opportunity to be here this evening to participate. Two things, verification of citizenship and voter ID. And what I was talking about in response to Senator Bacon, the University of Delaware and the University of Missouri participated in the survey, in the study of whether or not voter identification requiring an ID to vote suppresses voter turnout. Both of them came to the same conclusion. It does not. I don't know of anybody, in having spent 12 years in higher education, who is going to question professors at the University of Delaware and the University of Missouri as to whether or not requiring somebody to present an ID to vote is going to suppress voter turnout.
Okay, Bob.
Those professors did not go to the DMV in Colorado trying to renew their driver's license or get a picture ID. Experience tells me that it can be very difficult to get a picture ID in Colorado, largely as a result of our budget cuts with the DMV and the ease in getting those. My statement is that I wanted to make it as regular and easy to register permanently in order to be able to vote and get as many people to vote and participate in elections as possible. And I think that oftentimes we use other sorts of issues in order to suppress the vote, and I think that we need to not suppress it. We need to be as inclusive as possible in making sure that people get out and vote and register their opinions, and of course, hopefully, be informed with those opinions.
Okay, Kevin?
Very quickly, I would agree with Senator Bacon that it needs to be accessible, but it needs to be balanced with the need for a system that we can have confidence in. I believe that Tom put it quite well in stating that the voter ID is an essential component, but I would only add the footnote, with a robust system of the exceptions. We have the provisional ballot today. That can still be in place so that when somebody, because no one should be defrauded of their vote, either by somebody's illegal vote, canceling theirs out, or for them being prevented to vote. They both have to be in place. I believe we have a decent system today, but we need a better system, and that's why I support the voter ID.
Okay, Scott?
Barbara, thank you for having me here this evening, and to the league as well. Voting is the business that I'm in over there at the courthouse, and I like to see people vote. It's the grease of democracy. The more grease, the better the machine runs, I think. I think that that mail ballots, they're coming into their time. 80% of our voters in many counties are going to the polls that way these days. And in November generals, that's the only time we hold a polling place election. It's very expensive. It's very expensive for us to maintain that kind of equipment and address those variables. So I think it could enhance, and so does the whole of the Clerks Association, if we were to go to mail ballots in the state of Colorado.
Exclusive mail ballots.
Exclusive mail, yes. Election day is next Tuesday, the 1st of November. So I'm encouraging anyone watching this that's going to see it before that time to, if you don't have your ballot, if you don't know if you're active or not, and you want to vote, get a hold of us. Look at larimer.org/elections or give us a call, 498-7820. And we're happy to help you through that process to be able to get your ballot and get it voted.
Good, thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists, to our studio audience and our viewing audience.
Thank you.